There are now two separate reports, one from News 24 and one from Daily Maverick, indicating that the head of the NPA, Shamila Batohi, has now formally asked President Cyril Ramaphosa to suspend the Johannesburg head of public prosecutions, Andrew Chauke. Chauke has been accused of wrongdoing in decisions he made around the former head of the Police Intelligence Unit, Richard Mdluli, and the prosecution of KwaZulu-Natal Hawks head Johan Boysen. That was later struck down by a court. He was also the head of prosecutors for the Joburg region, while his wife, Phumeza Fachane, was working as the head of prosecutors in the Johannesburg High Court. Chauke has previously given one interview to Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. He has denied all wrongdoing, saying that he can justify each of the legal decisions he made in these cases. That interview is still available for you online. However, the organisation Open Secrets has been asking why the NPA has not previously acted against Chauke. Reisa Partha is an investigator at Open Secrets. Reisa, good afternoon to you. Why do you believe there is a case against Andrew Chauke? What do you believe he's been doing at the NPA?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to everybody watching. Andrew Chauke holds an incredibly powerful position within the NPA. He is the head of prosecutions in Johannesburg. And I think, as you illustrated in that very brief but, controversial biography, he's been in charge of some very serious prosecutorial decisions which have been sort of clouded in controversy. The main one, of course, being the decision to prosecute Johan Boysen. And as we know, that prosecution failed due to insufficient evidence. He's been asked to explain that decision, and as yet, he maintains that there was sufficient evidence to prosecute Boysen. But the Mahoro inquiry, the High Court in Joburg, and an independent NPA investigation has found otherwise. So there is definitely a case for him to answer to.
He says he's done nothing wrong, that there's a good legal reason for everything that he did. I mean, what do you make of that argument, that he was merely interpreting the law as he saw it? And, I mean, Reisa, I don't need to tell you, lawyers can argue anything.
Well, it's interesting. The NPA does have a prosecution policy in terms of how prosecutors should go about prosecuting cases. I think in Chauke's instance, he has to show that there was that evidence, because really that's what's missing in the Boysen case. The NPA in that case took on a very serious challenge in trying to prosecute Boysen and several other Hawks officers for a so-called racketeering offense that involved the so-called Ketamana death squad, which people might be familiar with. At the time, the Sunday Times had published a series of articles about there being a death squad in the Hawks, which then kind of collapsed because there was no evidence. So in this case, Chauke and others in the NPA, we must, kind of remind ourselves that he didn't act alone. There were a team of prosecutors who worked on this case. And actually, this team was flown out from Johannesburg, from the Northwest, to prosecute the case in KwaZulu-Natal, which is highly irregular. Normally, prosecutors in a province would take on a case. But as yet, all of these prosecutors say that they followed the law. The NPA's prosecution policy says that you can only decide to prosecute a case if there is sufficient evidence and a reasonable prospect of successful prosecution. In this case, that test was failed, and these prosecutors, including Chauke, have failed to show that there was that evidence to prosecute Boysen and others.
It's taken a very long time to get here. Some of these cases go back 10 years, some of them even more than that. The NPA says it's trying to reform itself. Do you believe them? I mean, this has taken a long time.
I think the NPA is certainly trying to reform itself. I think at the moment they're suffering a sort of managerial issue in terms of trying to address the challenges within the authority. I think, yes, I agree certainly that the Chauke matter, certainly the disciplinary action against him, has taken far too long. When Shamila Batohi took office as the NDPP in 2018, she knew about these allegations, and she said as much in the annual report of the NPA in that year. So for it to take 5 years to recommend to the president, particularly after an NPA investigation released findings in 2019, it raises a lot of various questions. So I think the NPA is doing its best. I think that this is a positive step in the right direction. But the NPA should certainly explain to the public why it has taken so long. Because that's, I think, is part of the reason why there has been a lack of trust. And it's also important that there should be that explanation, because so far the NPA has been unable to explain, for example, its failure in the Nulane case, its failure in terms of the Gupta extradition. And so it becomes more important to talk about the issues like childcare, like there being a prosecutor in Johannesburg who heads up that office, and there being a 5-year delay to say, hey, maybe somebody else should be in leadership in that office.
Raisa Partha, thank you, an investigator at Open Secrets.